Once upon a time, in a place where I, 20, male, worked as a dispatcher, things operated a little differently. Instead of separate emergency numbers, we had one nationwide hotline that connected callers with firefighters who would then provide assistance similar to paramedics, albeit without administering drugs. In this story, there was a regular caller named John who was notorious for causing chaos on the communication lines. He was often rude, loud, and frequently intoxicated. It just so happened that on this particular day, my shift was already a mess with multiple units responding to calls, and we were understaffed. Amidst this chaotic day, John contacted us once again, demanding transportation services. He typically used our services for non-emergency transport, such as physiotherapy sessions. However, this time, he was insistent and belligerent, screaming at me and calling me names when I explained that taking a cab would be a cheaper option. John contacted us because no one else was willing to provide him with a free ride. He was unwilling to pay for transportation, unlike his usual practice. I reiterated that our service was not a taxi service and advised him to schedule transportation like everyone else. In his frustration, he threatened to call 911, claim it was an emergency, and complain to my superiors, although they were not his superiors. I calmly responded, "You can do that, sir. You are a free citizen." He hung up, and shortly afterward, I received a call from the emergency hotline requesting an immediate response to John's location. I informed the 911 dispatcher that John was a dangerous individual and my fellow responders would require assistance. Upon arriving at the scene, my colleagues were perplexed to find not only the police, but the intervention team as well. They questioned me over the radio, wondering why there was a need for law enforcement and why John was being arrested, as the call had initially been reported as alcohol poisoning. As it turned out, John had attempted to hail an Uber from the police officers themselves, and even tried to force his way into the driver's seat. In response, the officers resorted to physical force, both for his refusal to cooperate and for assaulting one of them. John ended up in the hospital with several broken bones, receiving treatment not only for his injuries but also for his alcohol addiction. As the story concludes, I bid John farewell, wishing him good luck and reminding him that we care about him, despite the turbulent circumstances. It all began when I embarked on a mission to find a replacement phone through Montreal's classified section of Kijiji. My goal was to snag a brand new Samsung S5, and after some searching, I stumbled upon a reasonably priced option for $420. To my surprise, the seller happened to live just a short 10-minute drive away from my place. We agreed to meet, and he agreed to sell me his supposedly pristine Rogers Samsung S5 for $400. Considering myself somewhat tech-savvy, I was well aware of the existence of fake replicas and blacklisted IMEI numbers. Determined to avoid any potential scams, I took the necessary precautions and requested the seller to send me the IMEI number via text message. The IMEI checked out clean, and everything appeared to be in order. On the designated day, at 4:30 p.m., we met in the West Island of Montreal. The seller, a 17-year-old boy sporting a red T-shirt, arrived on his yellow bicycle. He seemed polite and respectful, leaving a favorable impression. I carefully examined the phone, verifying that everything looked brand new, including the matching IMEI numbers on both the phone and the box. The presence of the Rogers bloatware further reinforced my belief that the transaction was legitimate. Without hesitation, I inserted my SIM card, and to my delight, everything worked flawlessly. I had no reason to doubt the authenticity of the phone. However, my optimism quickly faded when I reached home and performed a factory reset on the device, only to be greeted with an invalid IMEI message. My subsequent online research revealed that the seller had rooted the phone and manipulated the user interface to display a falsified IMEI number that matched the one on the box. In essence, he had sold me a counterfeit Samsung S5 lacking the fingerprint sensor feature, which I foolishly neglected to verify. Although the box and accessories were genuine, the phone itself was a mere imitation. That very night, I attempted to contact the seller regarding the issue, but he proved uncooperative. After exchanging a few messages, he finally relented and agreed to refund my money the following morning at 8:30 a.m. at the same location where we had initially met. Later that night, I took it upon myself to investigate the seller further. I discovered that he had deleted his Kijiji ad and had employed an online forwarding service for his phone number. To gather more information, I turned to Google Street View and scoured the residential areas surrounding our meeting spot. And there it was, evidence of the same young man on his bike entering a house. I had caught him red-handed. The next morning, I arrived at the agreed-upon location, fully expecting to retrieve my money as promised. However, my expectations were dashed as the seller was a no-show. He had bailed at the last minute and ignored my calls. Frustrated but undeterred, I decided to drive around the area, hoping to catch a glimpse of him or uncover any leads. Alas, my efforts proved futile, and I left empty-handed. Nevertheless, I refused to give up. Fast forward 1 week to Sunday, August 17, 2014. I revisited the same area, and lo and behold, I spotted a car parked in front of the aforementioned house. Maintaining a safe distance, I patiently observed the situation. After 15 minutes, I saw the culprit carrying grocery bags making his way back to his house. Seizing the moment, I swiftly exited my car and confronted him. He was taken aback by my presence but managed to maintain his composure. Though I refrained from physical altercations, I shadowed him closely, presenting him with two options. Either he returned my money, allowing us to part ways, or I would involve the police and report his illicit activities. Sadly, the scammer remained indifferent and showed no inclination to rectify the situation. Unfazed, I continued to tail him as he boarded a public bus, likely assuming that he could elude me, believing I wouldn't follow him any further. However, I remained steadfast and joined him on the bus. 5 minutes into the ride, a police van intercepted the bus, bringing it to a halt. The officers entered, and I pointed them in the direction of the culprit. Eventually, justice prevailed, and I managed to reclaim my money, his best course of action given the circumstances. As for the scammer, he faced the consequences of his actions, getting arrested for possession of stolen goods, as the personal phone he carried was reported as stolen. Reflecting on the incident, I consider myself fortunate to have identified the perpetrator thanks to the assistance of Google Street View. This experience serves as a reminder to stay vigilant and exercise caution when conducting transactions. This happened to me a few years ago, and I just remembered it recently. I was working at a restaurant waiting tables in a very affluent area on the Jersey Shore. We had our fair share of entitled people who were under the impression that if you throw enough money around, you can do whatever you want and treat people however you want. And when your income depends on their tips, you kind of just have to deal with it. The restaurant had an outdoor dining and bar area that overlooked the ocean with an amazing view. During the summer, this was pretty much where everyone wanted to sit rather than our indoor dining area. And for anyone who works someplace with outdoor dining, you know the one monkey wrench that can ruin a very profitable dinner shift: the weather. No matter how accurate the forecast says it's going to be, you can never know for sure. For the most part, we never had an issue because if it started to abruptly rain, there would usually be more than enough room inside for all the people who were sitting outside to move it. It's usually a mess to keep track of which table moved where, but we always handled it without any issue. Until that one day, we had a large party booked one day in our indoor area that took up more than half our tables. A 50th birthday, I believe. So our indoor capacity was limited. And even on top of the party, there were customers who were weary about the weather, so they decided to sit inside also. And then more and more people started sitting outside. My manager did a quick assessment and realized that if it started raining, we would barely have enough room inside to accommodate everyone who was sitting outside. He told us we had to stop seating people in the outdoor area and to start recommending the outdoor tables to move inside because of the impending weather to be on the safe side. Everyone's weather app was saying there was a downpour coming up the coast. Everyone was okay with it, except I had a table of 9 people who seemed fairly middle-aged and very wealthy. Each end of the table seemed to be in their own conversation, not paying attention to the other. Upon hearing about the incoming rain, I go to the woman whom I thought was in charge. She had the fakest tan of them all, and I tell her, let's call her Karen. Ma'am, I'm really sorry, but because of the weather coming in and our limited seating inside, I'm going to have to move you inside so you don't get caught in the rain. This Karen is so entrenched in her conversation, she doesn't even register that I, a lowly waiter, was talking to her. So, I tried again, ma'am. I'm sorry for interrupting, but she cuts me off, exasperated. What are you saying? I begin again. Ma'am, I'm sorry because of the weather coming and our inside filling up. We need to move you inside. We have a table ready for you. I can move all your drinks and everything for you. She snaps back with the only reason we came here was to sit outside. We'll deal with the weather. I realize she doesn't grasp what I'm saying, so I try again. Ma'am, just in case And then she goes from 0 to 100 and yells. I said, we'll deal with it. She yelled so loudly that the people on the other half of her table heard. They didn't hear our prior exchange, but only heard her outburst and went back to their conversation, assuming this must be normal behavior for her. She wants to deal with it on her own. You got it. So I began to take their order. Filet mignons, a few lobster tails, expensive stuff. I put the order in and I looked back and all the other tables had moved inside because they all were rational human beings. And my table of 9 entitled jerks were the only ones out there. I heard the leathery-looking Karen say to the rest of the table, wow, we have the entire patio to ourselves. What luxury. After a while, I looked inside and saw that the table I had held for them was taken by another party that had just walked in, the last available table. And just as the last person hit the seat, I felt the best feeling I possibly could have felt at that moment. A glorious raindrop tapped on the top of my head. Within seconds, it went from beautiful blue skies to torrential downpour. Everyone at the table grabbed their drinks, a little watered down at this point, and ran inside. After they shook themselves dry, they looked around and realized there was nowhere for them to sit. Most of them looked dumbfounded, like a lost child in a supermarket. Karen makes a beeline to me and screams we need a table. I replied, I'm sorry, ma'am. We're fully seated and waiting for our indoor seating. Maybe one table on the waiting list, but a list is a list. Well, what are we supposed to do now? She harked back at me, which led to me so eloquently, saying, Ma'am, as you said, you will deal with it. I air-quoted it to really emphasize that this was her response, and as I said, that everyone else at the table realized that was our interaction earlier and Karen had dug their graves. I felt bad for most of them because if they had all known the circumstances, they probably would have convinced Karen to move in. But after she raised her voice and cursed at me, all bets were off, and as serendipity would have it, at that moment their food came out and we handed it to them. There they were, 9 people in damp clothes holding a Cosmo in one hand and filet mignon in another with nowhere to sit to eat. The rest of her party convinced her just to get some boxes for their food and pay their check and leave. As I hand Karen the check, she smugly says, well, this will be reflected in your tip. To which I replied, ma'am, we implement a 20% tip on parties of 8 or more. It's our policy, and it's clearly stated in our menu. She paid, and then they left with their boxed-up food. Best $60 I ever made. In years past, I worked at a corporate location for a cell phone company with a big blue globe for the logo. The longer I worked there was a noticeable increase in micromanaging occurring due to corporate leadership. So, around the holidays, one of these people had the brilliant idea of wanting a detailed email about every single customer interaction that was had. This would cover a list of things that we offered, any customer rejections, and what we did to overcome said objections. For certain items, such as insurance, we needed to have 3 rejections we attempted to overcome. If we only had a single rejection and then moved on with the interaction, we'd get a coaching, which is a typed document about what we did and what we need to do from here on. If we don't correct ourselves immediately, it can lead to disciplinary actions and the likes. Because this email enforcement occurred around the holidays, a time where we happened to be overworked and understaffed as it was already, I convinced my coworkers to have some fun with the emails. After every interaction, we would go into the break room and hop onto a computer to type up a lengthy email about our interaction. It would end up taking around 10 minutes to write this email if you went slow enough. After enough time, there'd end up being a line to hop onto the computer to type up and send this email, all while there's a line constantly building out front full of customers. We had some irate customers out there, and we'd just shrug and say, "Sorry, our management wants an emailed description of every interaction before we can help the next customer." After the holidays, this practice was eventually stopped, but we definitely got some negative reviews about it. I can only imagine the number of sales we lost out on from people walking in and then walking right back out because of our long line of customers, while most of us were in the back typing up an email to management.